my god. What time is it? Wait, November? 2025? Oh no, oh god. Wait, who the hell are you? You fucking moron, you buffoon, you recording a joke about the amount of time you're going to be spending on this project? You? Bitch, you don't know what's going to happen. You're going to get into a car accident. Wait, what? Motherfucking chain lightning! Alright, bitches, we're skipping the preamble. We're Zelda 2 video, it's done. I finished it, it's done. It's over. We're jumping into it. Our next stop brings us to January 14th, 1987. Less than a year after the first Legend of Zelda hit store shelves. Today we're talking about the worst Zelda game, if we're not including CDI in this discussion, which I'm not. And it's the only one I think is just bad. It's just a bad video game, poorly designed, bad to play, terrible. Zelda II: The Adventure of Link. So, let's see how Nintendo followed up one of the most revolutionary games of all time and how it so spectacularly missed the mark. Today's retrospective is going to start with something I didn't touch on in my last video, with the story. Zelda 1 had a very bare-bones story. Ganon had taken over Hyrule, seeking the Triforce of Wisdom. Zelda split it into 8 pieces that went to each dungeon, and you were tasked by her handmaiden, Impa, to go and collect them and save Hyrule. Now, I'm sure if you're a Zelda fan, you know this. However, I wouldn't blame anyone at the time for not knowing any of that, since it's tucked away like way at the end of the opening menu through just a slog of pretty non-essential information and in manuals that a lot of people don't have anymore. Zelda 2 is in a similar boat as its predecessor in this department. It has a very simple story that is not readily apparent through gameplay, but in the menus and manuals, though this game has a slightly more complex plot. You are in the same iteration of Hyrule, playing the same Link from the first game. Years after the end of that game, Link finds a Triforce-shaped birthmark on the back of his hand. He seeks out Impa, and she takes him to the North Castle to reveal to him a prophecy regarding the sealed door to the palace. Once again, you are tasked with saving a Zelda. However, this game Zelda is not the one you saved in the first game. Instead, she is an ancient Zelda put in unending sleep by a wizard as revenge for not telling her brother the hidden location of the Triforce. The only way for Zelda to be awakened after the spell was placed on her was when someone worthy once again reunited all 3 pieces. Of course, the man able to do that is Link, due to the Triforce birthmark on the back of his hand, and so you are off questing again. Impa gives you a map that only you can read, and 6 crystals to the palaces you must clear to find the Triforce of Courage. This time, when you vanquish the bosses in the dungeon, you remove the sealing power on the Triforce so you can collect the final piece, having gotten wisdom and power in the previous game, so you can undo Zelda's eternal sleep. At the same time, Ganon's minions are trying to kill you so they can use your blood to revive their fallen master. And that's the story. Again, no context in-game as to what you're doing due to the same limitations as the first game, a very small file size, this being the first time these developers had tried something to that extent. It's simple, but if you had grown up in a world without our current AAA landscape, the story does a good enough job hooking the player and drawing you into adventure. However, I do find it strange that even though this is the same iteration of Hyrule and the same portion of history and the same Link, the Zelda you fight to save is a different character from hundreds of years in the past. Really, it could have been the same Zelda sealed in the palace, and I often pretend that it is whenever I think about this game, just because it builds more pathos with these 2 versions of those characters. And so, you set off from the North Castle, the place you start the game, and immediately you will notice a stark difference between Zelda 1 and 2. Where Zelda 1 had a top-down style across the entire game, Zelda 2 has become top-down during overworld travel and exploration, and a side-scrolling action-adventure in the vein of Castlevania and Metroid during combat and dungeon crawling. It splits the game very clearly into 2 separate modes of play, the first being the exploration phase, which will either lead you to a random enemy encounter or to a predetermined location on the map that transitions into the combat phase. Since it's the first thing you really interact with, let's discuss overworld exploration. In this mode, Link moves nearly identically to his Zelda 1 iteration, being only able to move in the 4 cardinal directions. However, unlike Zelda 1, Link has no combat or interaction abilities while exploring the overworld, at least not at the start of the game. Ultimately, you will gain 4 key items that allow you to further your exploration. You get the hammer, which allows you to break rocks blocking your path, the raft, which has exactly 1 point to take off from, but otherwise acts the same as Zelda 1, the boots that allow Link to walk across water except for the areas you can't, and the flute that scares away the river devil. While this is an equal number to the exploration items in Zelda 1, this set is far less usable than the originals. The flute has exactly 2 uses in the game, the raft has 1, the hammer has 3 to 4, and the only one with lasting use is the boots. This naturally curbs the amount of exploration that can occur in Zelda 2. Zelda 1 may have had you burning every bush in an attempt to find something, or bombing every wall, but Zelda 2 has you travel across every tile in the overworld to try and find the hidden ones that access the game's secrets. Practically none of the secrets in this game are found by using items you collect in dungeons, a distinct break from Zelda 1's method of teaching the player to explore. But before we get to how these items are discovered, we have to talk about how this game teaches you exploration. When you exit the North Castle, Zelda 2 presents a road heading east along with a swath of grassland. If you take the road, you can easily travel to the first town in the game, Rauru Town. However, if you step off the road and travel by the grasslands, you are going to be drawn into a random encounter with monsters. This teaches the players one thing from the start: follow the road or you'll get punished. Unlike Zelda 1, in Zelda 2 there are safe spaces in the overworld of Zelda 2 that aren't just little caves tucked away with people inside. No, in Zelda 2 there are full towns of people near every dungeon. Here you'll interact with the series' first real attempt at NPCs. While Zelda 1 had shopkeepers and cave hermits, those all remain locked to one point and would usually vanish upon interaction. They also inhabited all of 3 sprites instead of the 9 or 10 of Zelda 2. Interacting with the NPCs of Zelda 2 will usually give you no useful information, but young women in red dresses and old women in orange dresses outside of their homes will always be helpful. The women in red will heal Link back to full, and the women in orange will refill all of his magic. Others will occasionally prompt you to find quest items to gain new spells. However, the messages they give you are incredibly obtuse, and even confusing, similar to the clues the hermits would give you in Zelda 1. The main problem with this is that the translations of Zelda 1 and 2 are really poorly done, and lack context to make their riddles and hints functionally useful to the player. But unlike the hermits in Zelda 1, the clues the NPCs in Zelda 2 give you are necessary to complete the game. This is because the adventure of Link is almost an entirely linear experience. Spells and or items from previous dungeons/towns will lock you from exploring further in the overworld or prevent you from progressing within dungeons. Where Zelda 1 could be described as an open-ended, freeform adventure, Zelda 2 is characterized entirely by linearity. Unlike Zelda 1, it is very difficult to do palaces out of order unless you specifically go out of your way to do so. The first place you will go is the town of Rauru, where you can discover the shield spell, allowing you to take half damage from one of the lowest magic costs in the game. Then you will travel to Parappa Palace, a simple dungeon with very few branching paths. In this dungeon you will find the candle, which lights up dark areas like caves and later dungeons. This is the same formula for every other dungeon in the game. You will find a new town, many of which share names with characters in Ocarina of Time, find the wise man that teaches you the spell, or the knight that gives you a new sword technique you'll need for the next dungeon, and using that you go to the palace to find a new item that will be needed to get to the next dungeon. The only real change in this formula is the occasional divergent trip to find a quest item that lets you receive the spell. This makes up the vast majority of the playtime in Zelda 2, with the only exploration being the hidden heart containers and magic containers. These items are placed on tiles in the overworld with no indication that they are different from the rest. The original Zelda was similarly frustrating when it came to hiding its secrets, but I could forgive Zelda 1 because you didn't need all of them to complete the game. That's right, you need to find all 4 magic containers to even beat the game. Not 100% complete it, but beat it. The final town, Old Kazuto, has a wise man who only teaches you the thunder spell needed to damage the final boss, the Thunderbird, once you have all the magic containers. This is directly antithetical to what Zelda 1 did to teach you. In fact, in Zelda 1, you could beat the game by doing only the main dungeons and no additional exploration. However, items, spells, and techniques are not the only form of progression in Zelda 2. Killing enemies or finding a point bag will grant you experience points because, of course, Zelda 2 has an RPG leveling system. These levels will automatically go towards life first, though you can cancel the level up and wait to level up magic or attack instead. Once you've leveled up 1, you'll go to magic, then attack. These levels affect Link's defense, magic cost, and damage respectively, each having a maximum level of 8. Because of this, there are no hidden sword upgrades or rings like Zelda 1, meaning that your progression is directly tied not to exploration, but to combat. So, let's talk about that. Combat in Zelda 2 is now a part of the side-scrolling action-adventure rather than the top-down of Zelda 1. Link can only attack directly in front of him, and while I complained about the sword jab of Zelda 1, Holy shit, do I wish I had the same attack length in Zelda 2. Link's sword is the length of a butcher knife, forcing you to get dangerously close to enemies in order to damage them. Like Zelda 1, when Link is at full health, he can use a sword beam to damage enemies, but unlike Zelda 1, this game's sword beam goes pitifully short distances and will usually not even damage enemies. In fact, I sometimes found that having the sword beam to be a hindrance rather than a boon when fighting enemies, because it would bounce them away from my swing, causing me to miss and take unnecessary damage. This is the opposite of Zelda 1, where I would hold onto the sword beam as long as possible because it was so versatile. Link does have a few extra things he can do in combat, however. He has his shield, which allows you to block some, and by some I mean a painfully small number of attacks. It only works directionally, meaning if someone attacks your ankles, you better crouch down and then immediately pop back up to avoid the sword coming at your unexposed squishy face. And again, there is no upgrading your shield. You just have to find the reflect spell if you want it to actually stop most attacks. The only permanent upgrades to Link's fighting capabilities are the two techniques you can find hidden in towns. At the start, all you can do is attack directly in front of you while either standing or crouching, but eventually you do gain access to the down thrust and jump thrust, allowing Link to attack beneath and above him when he jumps respectively. While I found the jump thrust to be incredibly situational, the down thrust is an invaluable tool for later dungeons. It allows you to bounce off previously annoying enemies and run away, saving you both health and magic from not engaging in a drawn-out fight. This is important because many of the stronger enemies in Zelda 2 either require spells to defeat or have shields that will block your attacks, forcing you into a drag-out fight that requires an insane amount of cheese to complete. None of this is helped by your control over Link. The man moves like he's controlled by an Anayak. The controls are incredibly unresponsive. Link often takes several frames before responding to a single input. And when you're attempting something like fighting a complex enemy like an Iron Knuckle, especially their blue variants, a few frames means the difference between life or death in one or two swings. The same goes for platforming, something Zelda 2 also took from Metroid and Castlevania. With Link responding slowly to inputs, it will often lead you to missing jumps you could absolutely make because he simply walked off the edge into a death pit. And even if Link wasn't so unresponsive, his speed is incredibly low and his jump barely gains enough height to make some necessary jumps, forcing you to make it to the very edge of a platform to have any chance at making a 1-foot jump. And none of this would be so frustrating if it weren't for the goddamn live system that was implemented. Now, when you die, you'll return to the same screen you died on at full health and magic. This is seemingly more forgiving than Zelda 1, where death would send you back to the start of the game with only a few hearts. However, this was not the case in a dungeon where you would simply return to the start of it. Now, if you die too many times, you will have a game over that sends you all the way back to the North Castle, forcing you to trudge your way back through the overworld, avoiding random encounters and forced combat scenarios, back to the dungeon and back to where you died. It also removes all of the experience you've gained up until that point. If you were 5 points away from a level up that costs 4,000 experience, too fucking bad, bozo. You're shit out of luck, and all those point bags you collected, gone forever. Back to the grind for you. And unless you somehow, some way thought that killing enemies in this game was going to give you healing items like they did in Zelda 1, oh no! Your health can only be restored in one of 4 ways: dying in towns by random chance fairies or by using the life spell. So if you run out of magic and now enemies aren't dropping potions to restore your magic and you're in the middle of a dungeon, that's just tough shit, man. Walk out and come back when you're a little healed. It is such lazy padding for this game, especially when coupled with the live system that forces you to trek all across Hyrule if you die too much. It's so unbelievably frustrating, causing unnecessary tedium at every step of your adventure. And because Zelda 2 did away with the usable items of the first game, you are constantly having to do resource management for something with no readily available way to restore it. Speaking of, let's discuss the newly added magic system before we move on to the dungeons and overall enemy design. You gain access to 8 spells throughout the course of the game. As mentioned, the first is the shield spell, which allows you to take half damage for a single screen. The second is jump, which lets Link double his jump height for a single screen. The third is the life spell, a rather costly spell that allows Link to restore some health while outside of a town. The fourth is fairy, transforming Link into a fairy that can fly around, though you can't do any damage for a single screen. The fifth spell is fire, which allows you to shoot fireballs from your sword that do more damage than your regular sword beam, and is necessary to kill Tektites and basilisks. The sixth spell is the Reflect spell, which allows you to reflect magic attacks and block previously unblockable attacks like clubs, axes, and fireballs. The seventh spell is the Spell spell, which is only used one time to reveal a secret room with the magic key in New Katsuto. And the final spell is the Thunder spell, which does the most damage in the entire game while using the most magic and is required to defeat the Thunderbird. While only 5 of these spells are necessary to beat the game, I highly encourage anyone who plays Adventure of Link to find all 8, because as much as I hate the system, it is important that you engage with it. Without all these spells, you are going to die so much more than if you found them, especially Life and Shield. I found that ultimately Fairy became a godsend ability that allowed me to avoid most enemies and traps for a single screen for a comparatively low magic cost. Often, it would be more beneficial to use it over Shield and then Life if I ended up getting injured in a fight. Reflect was easily the spell that I found using most, other than the initial Shield and Life spells. Being able to block attacks from the strongest enemies in the game saved more of my health for the magic cost than restoring my life using the Life spell would've, especially if I died before getting to cast the spell. Now, you'll be using these spells throughout the game, but primarily in one of the game's 7 dungeons. These dungeons hide items that allow Link greater access to the overworld or through specific side-scrolling locations. These items are usually well out of the way, typically on the opposite end of the dungeon as the boss, forcing you to explore the entirety of the dungeon in order to complete it. The only item that you don't find in these dungeons is the hammer, which is found while exploring Death Mountain, a veritable mini-dungeon in its own right. But the most frustrating part of this is that you are required to find these items to move on to the next dungeon. Zelda 1 had this to some extent, like needing the raft from Dungeon 3 to get to Dungeon 4, but it is so much worse in Zelda 2. It forces linearity by only allowing you to do the latter 3 out of order, only by the merit of not needing to complete the dungeons before you move to the next. You can collect the boots from the 4th dungeon, and then go to the 5th, where you can collect the flute and then go complete the 6th dungeon. But you still need the items from the previous dungeon to do the next, so you'll pass through each of them in order, with each increasing in difficulty as you go on. So there's little point in not just completing the 4th dungeon before traveling to the 5th, because you were already well within the dungeon when you found the item. Another change that Zelda 2 introduced was unique themes with different tiles and colors, whereas Zelda 1 only had unique colors. Overall, I think this was a good decision, allowing the palaces to differentiate themselves beyond just layout, but like Zelda 1, there are only a couple of musical tracks that are incredibly repetitive and don't help differentiate the palaces tonally like the visuals do. Additionally, the design of Midoro Palace, the 2nd dungeon, was so abysmally crafted that it caused me physical pain. The scrolling of those upright rectangles with that specific color gave me such a splitting eye headache that I had to stop recording and leave this project for several days. Just a truly skull-shatteringly bad design when put into motion. The dungeons also have confusing layouts, often with multiple rooms looking the exact same on different levels and similar rooms connecting them. Where I suggested Zelda 1 required a guide to complete, I needed a guide to beat Zelda 2. Thank you, Zelda Dungeon. There are invisible holes, loops that lead you into infinitely respawning combat encounters, death pits, leaps of faith, and top-to-bottom confusing level design throughout. It makes the game needlessly more confusing and difficult, where I frequently got stuck only to find out that I had to walk through an invisible wall that required a very precise jump to access. And forget the puzzles of Zelda 1, Zelda 2 completely does away with the dungeon puzzles and instead throws NPC riddles at you simply because of the hardware limitations. The enemies don't fare much better. While the enemies in the overworld are annoying, dungeon enemies are the worst. Overworld enemies act similar to those in Zelda 1, where they approach Link and attack him with strikes similar to Link's or spit projectiles that can be blocked by your shield without the Reflect spell. As you progress, the enemies do get stronger and can eventually block Link's attacks or attack through his shield. But these enemies are avoidable both by dodging the random encounters straight from the overworld or by using magic once in the actual encounter itself. It is the palace enemies where Zelda 2 gets unbelievably frustrating. Almost every enemy in the palaces can either block Link's attacks, break through his shield, or provide Link with no experience after the fight. Disregarding the enemies that ignore what Adventure of Link teaches the player how to engage in combat, for now, the enemies that you fight and drop nothing are so frustrating. They are almost always spawning from just off-screen in waves that can quickly overwhelm the player for no benefit. It is textbook padding, even more padding, that leads to the player dying and eventually being sent to the game over screen all the way back at the beginning of the game for nothing.
They all die in one hit, meaning that you as a player don't even gain practical experience with fighting enemies that can translate into better combat skills later down the line. It's endlessly frustrating, especially if they spawn in a room with the real palace enemies, because these palace enemies ignore the rules set out in the overworld in earlier dungeons. As a player, you are taught that with quick reflexes, you can make an opening by shifting up and down to block the incoming attacks and then counter the enemies once you've moved close enough to hit them. You may have to jump over attacks or duck under them, but you still have a chance to sneak in, even with Iron Knuckles, one of the hardest enemies in the game. But then, there are monsters like the Doom Knockers and Goombas that throw weapons in tiny arcs at Link that he can't block or dodge. They act like the Hammer Brothers from Super Mario, easily the worst designed enemy in that game as well. They throw what feels like dozens of maces at Link in quick succession, rarely ever giving you a chance to sneak in and defeat the creature without taking a shit ton of damage. They can be blocked only by using the Reflect spell, one of the last spells you get in the game. Now, you may say that this is simply a progression in difficulty, something that all games do, including Castlevania, a game with many similarities to Zelda II. But since the arcs are so small, Link can't duck beneath the attacks, move while he's crouching, or block the attacks. It makes these encounters downright unfair. They can also make their attacks through walls, providing plenty of moments where you take damage that you can't return. Put short and simple, it blows. These enemies blow, and these dungeons blow. The only saving grace for these confusing, winding labyrinths and poor enemy design are the bosses. These bosses have some genuine, well thought out design with patterns and even phases that have a good difficulty curve that still fits what the game teaches the player. The first two bosses are covered in armor, meaning you can only strike their heads and have heavy hitting attacks that Link can't block. This is less frustrating than the enemies in the dungeon, because if you were killed fighting a boss with lives remaining, you return to the boss room immediately. All of your resources return. Bosses are also the only enemies in these fights, meaning that your attention can be entirely focused on the boss, so your reflexes can dodge these unblockable attacks. And unlike the bosses from Zelda 1, only 2 of these bosses require spells to defeat, unlike practically every boss from the first game needing bombs to defeat. I genuinely prefer this change to the formula of Zelda 1, and is something that I wish had been kept throughout the series. Almost all of these bosses require skill to avoid their attacks and work your way in. They can also be defeated by using only the sword, though this is likely due to that being your only weapon in the game. And of course, the coolest boss in the game, one that has become such a beloved part of the Zelda canon despite only being in 2 games, is Dark Link. A mirror match is always something that I love in fiction, but especially in video games. An enemy having the exact same method of attack as the player, using your own arsenal against you, is peak game design. And Dark Link has that, the same arsenal of basic attacks, with him blocking and dodging you. However, despite how cool of a concept as this fight is, Dark Link is unfortunately the worst boss in Zelda 2, requiring an unbelievable amount of cheese to beat. He often flips between blocking and attacking so fast that you can't respond, and I found the best way to defeat him was simply to crouch in the corner and stab at his ankles as he jumped towards me. And this is so frustrating because there are some genuinely good ideas in Zelda 2, but they are buried so deep beneath layers upon layers of tedium and decades of outdated game design. The linearity does not serve any function that would not be equally achieved by keeping the game an open world like its progenitor. The formula of town, spell/quest item, and then dungeon is frustratingly overused, even though it's only used 7 times in this game. The items serve little to no functions in the overworld and have 0 uses in the side-scrolling portions. The combat works in some very niche circumstances, but is usually a frustrating mess that requires you to constantly mash up and down on the D-pad and try to attack all the while dodging. The dungeons try to break the monotony of going through the same screens over and over by creating new tiles, but they are still confusing and filled with more of the frustrating combat. The puzzles are non-existent and instead replaced with poorly translated riddles hidden within unchanged tiles. Spells take so much magic that can only be reliably refilled outside of dungeons, where you have to use them, or by killing monsters and praying that this is the time they'll actually drop a potion. That leaves a portion of the game you're forced to engage with that you often don't want to interact with in any way, shape, or form. The music, while not written by Koji Kondo, instead written by Akito Nakatsuka, is good despite being a small selection. Zelda 2 makes the decision to throw away what Zelda 1 did in electing to be the anti-Mario, and turns it into a poor imitation of an action platformer. The aspects it raises from Super Mario, Castlevania, and Metroid all do damage to the identity of Zelda. The live system is easily the best contender for the worst idea
The developers
had in the less than 11 months that they had to create this game. I don't like The Adventure of Link. I would even go so far as to say I hate playing this game. But I do applaud Nintendo's willingness to experiment with Zelda. However, it's clear some 30-odd years out that the experiment was a complete and utter failure, and I'm very glad that they never tried to come back to this. A strange hodgepodge of Mario, Metroid, Castlevania, and Zelda may work on paper, and maybe some other developer with more time could have made it work, but that was simply not the case for Zelda II. Instead, it leaves behind a frustrating legacy that confuses the identity of the Zelda franchise at this point in our timeline. Zelda has no major identity now thanks to The Adventure of Link, so let's just hope that our next stop can help us steer in a more clear direction. And with that, I've been Flartman50, and once again, thank you for taking the time to watch this video. I know, like I said at the start, it's been a bit since the last video, and I sincerely hope the next one will not take as long, but I thank you all for sticking around for it regardless. If you enjoyed the video, consider dropping a like, leaving a comment, and subscribing. Once again, I've spent an unbelievable amount of time discussing The Adventure of Link, and I'd love to see what you all have to say about this game in the comments below.